Hello and welcome to my channel. I am the Economancer. Today in this video we will be discussing the concept of neoliberalism as defined by Byung-Chul Han. I'm just going to call him Han from now on because I'm bad at names. So let's go with it. We're also going to look how it relates to criticisms of capitalism made by Veblen and Schumpeter. We will be examining neoliberalism, although commonly associated with individualism, can actually be seen as communal, and how its projection of social norms is rooted in conflict theory rather than the consensus theory. So sit back, relax as we dive into the world of neoliberalism and its defense. So we're going to start off with a intuition pump. Why am I making this video? Well, first and foremost, this video came about due to Telosbound's podcast, the baptizing series, and he was talking with an artist. I can't let me make sure that I know, Giant Art Productions, and they were having a discussion on neoliberalism and how it's caused all of these problems. And so I want to defend neoliberalism as I've done before, because I think it's one of those things that people take really out of context or miss the historical innovations associated with neoliberalism as it is currently noted in the work of Michel Foucault and stuff like that, and what it actually is. So Han is a South Korean born German philosopher, and he defines neoliberalism as a form of capitalism that emphasizes individual freedom and choice while also emphasizing the need for minimal government intervention in the economy. He argues that this form of capitalism has led to the erosion of traditional social contract and resulted in increased inequality, loss of community, and social cohesion. He also argues that it has led to the rise of psychopolitical form of power, in which individuals are constantly under pressure to perform and compete, rather than being allowed to relax and enjoy leisure time. So, psychopolitical power, as defined by Han, is a form of power that operates through psychological means, such as manipulation of emotions, desires, and fears, rather than through the traditional forms of physical or legal coercion. It is a power that operates through the shaping of individuals' perceptions and beliefs, rather than through the direct control over their actions. This type of power is associated with the rise of neoliberalism and consumerism, as individuals are constantly under pressure to perform and compete, to consume and to conform to certain societal norms and expectations. It can be seen as a form of soft power which relies on the manipulation of individuals' subjectivity rather than on the use of force or legal authority. I see this similar critique of capitalism in Veblen, and Schumpeter, and most notably in Herbert Marcuse. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Herbert Marcuse, but I am going to focus on some of the work done by Thorstein Veblen. So if you read The Instinct of Workmanship, he argues that the instinct of workmanship is a fundamental human drive that is separate from the instinct of acquisition. According to Veblen, the instinct of workmanship refers to the innate human desire to create and produce things, to improve upon existing technologies and methods, and to strive for excellence in one's work. He contends that this instinct is at odds with the capitalist system, which values profit and acquisition over creativity and craftsmanship. He argues that the capitalist system tends to inhibit the natural expression of the instinct of workmanship, leading to the degradation of work and the erosion of traditional crafts. Veblen also argues that the modern industrial society has led to the separation of work and leisure, and that the capitalist system's emphasis on profit has led to the commodification of leisure time and the erosion of traditional leisure activities. These can be seen as such as prayer and things, because a lot of people don't have enough time for prayer because they're so busy. Then we look at Joseph Schumpeter. He also criticized capitalism for its lack of social justice and its tendency to concentrate wealth and the power in the hands of a small elite. He argued that capitalism creates inequality and that the economic elite's power would be used to shape the political and social systems to their advantage. He also criticized capitalism for its short-sightedness, arguing that it prioritizes short-term profits over long-term sustainability and social well-being. And if you look at this criticism of capitalism, what he says is it's a powerful engine of economic growth, but it's unstable, and it's prone to all these crises. And as the capitalist system grows, so does the inequality and the concentration of power. And that can have a negative impact on society and the environment. And we see both of these arguments are really in force on the leftist perspective. Even though both of these individuals would not be considered, well, you could probably take Veblen as a leftist, but you would take someone like Joseph Schumpeter as a moderate and a moderate on the right. And then you have this idea coming from this video that this is a right-wing criticism of it. And I've talked about right-wing criticisms of the free market and stuff like that, and how I'm really not a fan of a lot of those. And some of that, again, comes down to when the right wing is defining these things such as neoliberalism. They're doing it in these left-wing ideas. And I don't think as a right-winger you should be using the left-wing's ideas for criticism of something that has been, for most periods of time, been considered something right-wing. I just don't buy that argument. So I'm going to go into a defense of neoliberalism here. So first we start off with someone like Niklas Luhmann. So how did he define neoliberalism? So he took it as a political and economic ideology that emphasizes the importance of the market as the primary mechanism for the allocation of resources, and that promotes the deregulation of economic activity. So you're reducing the government intervention in the economy, and you have a stronger protection of individual rights. He also argued that neoliberalism is characterized by a strong belief in the efficiency of the market and the ability of individuals to make rational choices that will lead to economic growth and prosperity. He also argued that neoliberalism is associated with a shift in the role of the state, from actively managing and directing economic activity to a more hands-off approach, allowing the market to function with minimal interference. So why does this matter? What are we really trying to get here when we're looking at these two very similar but very different definitions of what neoliberalism is? So first of all, should we have a strong belief in the efficiency of the market? Well, as an economist, I do. I take it very serious. And I'm sure some people are going to be like, well, people don't make rational choices. People make boundedly rational choices. So given the amount of information, even though they're not sitting there calculating their utility function and stuff like that, they still act as if those things are true, right? So you can think of it this way. If you're throwing a ball and you're trying to aim it, you're not actively calculating the parabola of the ball so that you can hit the target. It's not like you're writing it out and then you're coming to the conclusion, you're like, well, if I throw it from here, I get this exact. We're not calculations like that, because that's what computers do. And that's why we have these robots that can take pictures and then hit things almost dead on accurate, because they're doing all those calculations. We have a rough approximation of those calculations, and that's similar with our utility function. All right. So one of the key things here is this idea that capitalism has led to erosions of traditional values, and that there's an increased level of inequality, and then we have this loss of community, social cohesion, and we look at this atomization of modernity, right? This is something that Hannah Arendt wrote about in how we have these totalitarian regimes take over. Is we have the atomization of the individual, and then you have a collective that is willing to pick up those pieces of those atomized individuals, put them together into a group, and then they will gain power that way, and then that leads to whatever that regime wants to do, take over, right? But I disagree with this notion that it's the form of capitalism that has led to these erosions. If you go back and watch my stuff on Adam Smith, you'll find the notion that capitalism is inherently communal. It's not individualistic. And when we're thinking about a communal effort, it would make more sense for the market to function with minimal interference. And I think it's a fool's errand here to think that inequality has increased now, that we're more equal now than we have been in the past. It's just an empirically false statement to say that we are more unequal now. And also, when we're thinking about this communal effort, we have the market functioning that has minimal interference from the government. And the market doesn't necessarily hold a monopoly on violent coercion, whereas the government does hold a monopoly on violent coercion. So next we have to think of this psychopolitical power and how it's associated with consumerism, that individuals are constantly under pressure to perform and compete, to consume, have these societal norms and social norms and expectations that are against our nature. Again, going back to that work done by Veblen, and even going back to Marx and some others, Gregory Lukács, Herbert Marcuse, right? But if you look at neoliberalism, I'm not sure why this is chosen over any other type of society. If you look at other types of societies, there's always been a pressure to perform and to compete. Because if you don't compete or perform, you get taken over, whether that is in manpower, whether that is in technology. That's always been associated with human life. If you take it from an evolutionary stance, right? You just have to compete. That's just what it is. Now, if you've watched any of my lectures on multi-level selection, you have internal competition, internal community, external community. Right? And both of these have to play, because that's where multi-level selection comes in. If I'm working with my in-group, I'm going to make sure that we're communal in effort against an out-group, and so on and so forth. And that's where you're going to have internal cooperation, external competition that leads to basically the most inherent part of human civilization's growth and evolution. Now, we can possibly agree on the notion that consumerism is this like negative aspect to human reality that we live in now. And to some extent, I agree with this, but I don't think it is inherent to neoliberalism or capitalism in and of itself. Because if we want to lay it at the feet of the economic system, you could easily just lay it at the feet of rejecting societal norms and values rather than instantiating them. Humans have always had a robust conformist behavior to social norms and expectations. It is only in the recent years that we have been seeing this rejection of those norms, especially with our faith towards neoliberalism, but it's been against neoliberalism that has led to the rejection of the values and norms. And you can kind of lay this into the foundation of okay boomer kind of society, where we're rejecting those values and norms of hard work, conformity, and consensus into this more individualistic, individualized relationship. But that's not neoliberalism. So, kind of building on top of this, if you look at some of the earlier videos I made on Talcott Parsons and his students on the battle against conflict theorists, you can see that Talcott Parsons is what we would consider now a neoliberal, probably one of the leaders of neoliberalism. His work focuses on the necessity of the four functional requisites of the system, or the agile model, with the key being the L here, that's the latent pattern maintenance variable. That latent variable is social norms, values, and expectations. Furthermore, if you look at famous neoliberal writers such as Milton Friedman, Frederick Hayek, Ellickson, Williamson, and North, there is a strong emphasis on how formal and informal institutions shape how choices are made and constrained within the societal context. So, why have we had these significant problems in society that everyone wants to blame on neoliberalism? Well, if you watch my previous videos on biased communications, which are essentially where Foucault got his ideas on the bias of power, or monopoly of power, whatever you want to call it, this bias comes from not the neoliberal tradition of individuals such as Friedman or Hayek, but it comes from the conflict theorist side, rejecting norms laid down by society because they felt they were either unjustified or justifying something wrong. And I don't understand why we would lay it at the feet of neoliberalism, which is a communal tradition based on the exchange of goods, services, and information. Now, to build on this conflict theorist idea, we have to think that conflict theorists argued that social norms are oppressive because they are used to maintain and reinforce power imbalances within the society. So if you look at the basis for conflict theory, society is composed of different groups with competing interests, and that these groups struggle for power and resources. Social norms are seen as one of the ways in which powerful groups in society maintain their power and control over the less powerful groups. For example, social norms that define certain behaviors or roles as appropriate for men and women can be used to justify and maintain gender inequality by limiting the opportunities and rights of women by reinforcing traditional gender roles. Similarly, social norms that define certain races or classes as superior or inferior can be used to justify and maintain racial and class inequality. Conflict theorists argued for years that social norms are not neutral, but rather they are shaped and maintained by the powerful groups in society to serve their own interests. They argued that these norms often reflect and reinforce existing power imbalances in society, and that they are used to legitimate and justify the exploitation and oppression of the less powerful groups. So if you're looking at conflict theory, and that it's arguing that social norms are oppressive because they use to maintain and reinforce power imbalances within society, and social norms are just one of those ways in which the powerful groups do such a thing, they also justify the exploitation and oppression of the less powerful groups. And this is where it gets crazy. Conflict theory justifies that because of the exploitation and because of the supposed oppression of those less powerful groups, that we should reject the most notably important social norms, such as religion. And so in this baptizing argument that's being made, I don't understand why you're going to lay it at the feet of neoliberalism, which as a tradition has stood against the conflict theory in favor of consensus theory. So, in my opinion, neoliberalism is a more communal tradition than the alternative economic systems that exist today. So long as there's free exchange of goods and services without the interference of third parties, then we can assume that individuals are doing the best to take into account all of the available information and choosing what they think is best for them. So I'm going to give you an example. Order Without Law, How Neighbors Settle Disputes. This is a book written by legal scholar Robert Ellickson, who spoke at the Hayek, not the Hayek Institution, but like the yearly Hayek meeting. So what was this book? He examined the ways in which disputes are resolved in rural communities without the need for formal legal institutions. The book argues that informal norms and social networks play a crucial role in maintaining order and resolving disputes in these communities. Ellickson examines the way in which these disputes are resolved in Shasta County, California, a rural area with sparse population, and finds that the residents of these communities often rely on informal norms and social networks to resolve disputes rather than formal and legal institutions. He argues that the informal norms are more effective than formal legal institutions in resolving disputes because they are tailored to the specific needs of the community and are based on trust and mutual understanding. This is why I think it's so important to look at how informal norms are better and more effective than having the government control the market and how it distributes resources and how it allocates resources. Because if you're looking at how these informal norms are created and maintained and how they change over time, he also explains how if you're looking at these norms, they're often based on shared values and customs, and that they are reinforced by social sanctions such as ostracism and gossip. He also argues that the norms are typically more efficient and less costly than formal institutions. So I think it's really important that we need to focus on these informal norms, these informal institutions, and how they maintain society, and keep it from what Schumpeter said being super cyclical, or keeping what Veblen called the instinct of workmanship in regard to human nature. Because we do have these desires to create and produce things. We do have the desire to improve upon technology and methods. And it's not the capitalist system that's at fault with this. It's the failure of norms to keep up with, because we want to centralize so much of the power. We're removing the context in which the informal institution can work. That is causing the loss of community. That is causing the loss of social cohesion. It's not psychopolitical forms of power, because that's always been a part of our nature. Herbert Marcuse argued about this in the 60s. And to think that he didn't build upon other individuals is insane. All of this can be laid at the foundation of these criticisms of neoliberalism being brought into and instantiated in our current era. Not that they're a part of neoliberalism and consumerism. It's that neoliberalism has been mutated and bastardized by these constant criticisms, these constant dialectical contradictions that have led to these, because of consensus, have led to us conceding ground as neoliberals to the left, which has destroyed society, societal norms, and the expectations. And those pressures to perform and compete and to consume, those aren't inherent to the system of capitalism. If you go back and read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, if you look at his moral sentiments, if you look at the other writers of capitalism, you can see that it was never about consumerism. This is a criticism that was laid down by the left and people such as Marx, Veblen, Schumpeter, who was not left, who was pro-capitalism, but wrote a book on how you could get to socialism through capitalism to prove that you could do it. But all of these people showed that the fundamental problem, in my opinion, is the rejection of the basic values associated with neoliberalism that has caused most damage. It's not neoliberalism itself, it's everybody criticizing it and nobody defending it. And with that, I hope this was a pretty good video and you have a wonderful day.